maybe. Good morning, everyone, or afternoon, as the case may be. Welcome, as always. Thank you for supporting my work and for coming today. If you have a question, just drop it over in the YouTube chat, all right? I hope all of my American friends had a great Thanksgiving last week. I traveled to see my family, and we went to a cabin in the North Carolina mountains. Posted a picture on social media, so you might have seen that. It was quite beautiful and quite up there in the mountains. But beautiful and nice weather, no snow or anything, but chilly and very nice, and had a great time. I did not I got a lot of writing done on the flight out, 5 hours nonstop from Spokane. So that was good. Didn't get much writing done the rest of the week, but I did get a lot of ideas and notes down and everything. And so I feel like I actually made a lot of progress on The Thief. Now I just have to write all of those words. Unfortunately, I got back late Saturday night, and it's been crazy pretty much since I got back. So I'm not to that yet, but after today, I should be able to turn my attention to that in full, hopefully. Let's see what else is going on. Finished Strange New Worlds. I know I talked about that last month. Happy to report that after the first 3 episodes, Pike did return in force, and it again became his show, and he was as wonderful as ever. Truly the dynamic anchor of that show. And I enjoyed the rest of the season a lot. There was one very dark episode, but certainly very compelling. Other than that, one of the best things about the show is its undercurrent of fun and the spirit of adventure that really characterized certainly the original series and all of the older Star Trek. And I think it's great that they have managed to recapture that. So really happy with that. And hopefully that continues in future seasons. I don't know, obviously, given this somewhat unique situation of it, obviously it's a prequel to the original series. Everyone knows how it will end, but I don't know how long we're going to take to get there. So I know season 3 is already in the works. I don't know how long it will continue after that. But anyway, looking forward to it. Other sci-fi entertainment. Look at what arrived this week. It says Farscape 25th Anniversary Edition Complete Series Blu-rays. This has been a long time coming. We have been carting around this massive box set of the original DVDs, which quality was not holding up, and it was taking up a ton of room. So very excited for these. Beautiful artwork on the cover. Next week, the Babylon 5 Blu-ray remaster arrives as well. Equally excited about that. So we are about to dive in 2 months of retro sci-fi watching, which happens to be 2 of the best sci-fi TV series ever created. So I am actually really excited about that. I will probably continue to have tons of thoughts about those on the rewatches in future broadcasts. So I want to get to your questions. So I actually had 2 questions on the Starship test launch. So I'm going to combine them. Understandable that I got 2 questions of that, because it was definitely on an otherwise fairly quiet month for space news. This was definitely the big story. So basically the questions are, what are your thoughts on the second test flight? I know it flew for longer and it met more of its goals, but it was so disappointing that it exploded again. So wonder what your thoughts are on it. First off, it was disappointing, mostly because it felt like we got so close. And then it ultimately, I guess we actually had 2 failures. The boosters exploded after separation. That was less surprising because they were testing a brand new system with respect to that. And it did its job, but then, exploded. So no dramatic landings back on shore quite yet. But then the Starship, it really looked like it was going to work. And then it just didn't. And that was disappointing. Faster is better. We want it now, right? But there was so much good here. it really did clear a lot more hurdles in its second test than in its first. All of the engines fired and performed perfectly. The all-important stage separation succeeded. That was where they ran into the problem the first time. There was no separation, and so then they had to trigger and abort an explosion to avoid massive damage and possibly worse on the ground. This time, separation succeeded, and Starship kept flying, and it flew for over 8 minutes. And so that was really big progress for only a second test. Goodness, those 8 minutes were just beautiful, weren't they? Watching it, I felt for the first time, it made me believe that this is actually going to work. And I do believe that it is actually going to work. So that was very inspiring. Negatives, the gobsmacking cost involved in these tests. If we're going to have 3, 4, 5 tests, it's hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars. I don't know the exact amount. That's still a lot of money. But SpaceX seems prepared and capable of weathering those costs and have planned for it and have not expressed any concerns about the mounting cost. That appears to be baked into the equation of the ultimate success of Starship. They seem ready for it. So, okay, they know a lot better than I do, right? They have 4 first-gen Starships already built and lined up, ready to test. They posted a picture of them earlier this week. And they're saying that the next test should be ready to go within a couple of weeks. We'll see, obviously, NASA approvals, FAA approvals, everything might delay it like they did this one a bit, but hopefully not as long, because another thing that worked with this test was the improvements that they made to the launch pad. Held up incredibly well, and so there was not widespread destruction on the ground like there was the first time. There was no melting or cracking up or massive debris or anything like that. It did much, much, much better. So that should speed up the next test. They don't have that hurdle to get through with respect to the regulatory approvals. So 4 first-gen Starships ready to go, and this week they announced details about the second generation Starship V2 that they are already getting ready, that will be ready to go after those 4 and possibly sooner. They all 4 of those might not end up flying. If version 2 is ready to go, they'll probably switch to it after a couple. The improvements are not revolutionary in any one way, but they are fairly comprehensive, designed to make it, first off, more reliable, which obviously, given the 2 explosions, we want that. We want more reliable, more efficient use of fuel, lighter weight, but possibly allowing for a greater payload, and various other things like that they are working on. So one of the neatest things about SpaceX and about its sister Starlink is their continual, relentless, iterative improvement that goes on. They are, we see what's happening right now, but they have backfilled improvements across multiple iterations. And we've really seen that most of all with Starship. They are constantly pushing through improvements and pushing them out to the builds as they are ready. And there is no, one version. There's always a new improvement coming along behind it. And that's really one of the neatest things about the company that I've seen. I'll also say that NASA's support has been uniform with respect to Starship. They have not expressed, at least publicly, any concerns about the first 2, successful failures, as one would put it. They seem to have learned the lesson, at least with respect to when dealing with private enterprise companies, of how testing works and how failure is the biggest learning tool and that can lead to future successes. And they seem to be, for now, they're giving SpaceX a lot of leeway on this project and trusting them and their process. And honestly, that's been one of the things that have worried me most of all, because NASA is historically so risk averse, because they had to be. And, their modus operandi was spend billions of dollars and take freaking forever, all with safety in mind. And when you're launching people, that has to be the case. But since the early days of the Mercury and then Apollo projects, which then they were willing to take risks because we were in a race with the Soviet Union. Since those days, they have been extraordinarily risk averse, and it is comforting to see that, at least with respect to their dealings with the private companies, that they are giving more leeway that way to testing and to failure to learn from it. So, I wish it hadn't exploded. We all wish it hadn't exploded. A perfect flight around the Earth would be wonderful. And goodness, I hope that we get that next time. But still, in the end, I am not discouraged. There's actually so much to be encouraged about. So if there are not any more questions today, like I said, it was a quiet week on the whole for space and astronomy and that type of thing. Webb continues to put out gorgeous photos and scientific studies and everything, some exoplanet action. NASA is moving forward with an ion propulsion rocket as well as a nuclear rocket. Those are both, it's exciting to see them looking into diversifying space propulsion, which will hopefully help us get around at least our solar system faster and more efficiently and that type of thing. But there was no more really big shocker of a stories this month, maybe next month. So if there aren't any further questions, then I will go on to today's reading. You're back to the thief, and I have a new scene there. The scene takes place early in the book. I know I'd previously read the potential very first scene in the book in which Aaron notices someone who looks out of place. And he follows his spidey sense and follows this person on Ares. And discovers a hidden ship. So we'll skip ahead a little bit without spoiling too much about what happens. He is able to sneak on board the ship and confront the alien. And after some events that for now will remain unnamed they have reached an uneasy truce of sorts. And Aaron is accompanying this alien, whose name is Tolje, to his homeworld for reasons that will become apparent in the book. Usual caveat, this is very much a first draft here, so forgive the any clunky language and repetitions and that type of thing. 1 second, they were cruising through empty space about 3/4 of an AU out from an ordinary G7 star. The next second, they were approaching. Aaron supposed space station was the only term that it could accurately be called, but the structure put to utter shame any station he'd ever laid his eyes on. It was like a city floating in space, or possibly a dozen cities linked together by a maze of enclosed tunnels. It had no uniform shape. It wasn't circular or oval or rectangular or square, but rather all of those things and more. Edifices jutted out in every direction, tall scraper-like buildings, stacked oblong enclosures, shining circles, spires and pyramids and vast stretches of flatness. It was as though every new section had been bolted onto the adjoining one with no thought given to architectural consistency or even structural integrity to create a hodgepodge of clashing motifs, metals, and skylines. It was grotesque, and yet also somehow beautiful in its defiance of all accepted norms of how one was supposed to build a proper space station. He arched an eyebrow at Tolje. Home, I take it? What do you call it? Neither. It's cloaked and from a great distance. That's not simple technology. You have it. Sure, thanks to the cats. How'd you get yours? Tolje ignored the question to twist some dials on the strange dash and speak several words in a series of guttural barks and clicks. Aaron winced at the prospect of having to listen to this harsh tongue nonstop during his visit, which reminded him, hey, I don't know your language. My translator is good, but I'm starting from scratch here. Aside here, Tolje does have a translator that translates his language into communist. So that's how they're able to communicate at this point. Tolje says, you've got touch check, right? If you mean filaments in my fingertips that connect to my cybernetics, I do. After another interchange on the comm, Tolje stood and went over to a module along the wall and sank his palm into it. A screen to the left lit up and he stepped away. Put your fingertips on the input pad. It'll feed you a translation dictionary. Basically the one I used to learn communist, but in reverse. The material turned out to have a gelatinous texture, cool to the touch. Straightforward ternary quantum programming rushed into his cybernetics, which immediately quarantined it all and swept it for viruses before processing the instructions. He didn't need to actually understand the Hesgear language, of course. His cybernetics would feed him the translation of a speech he heard, and a transmission device embedded behind his jaw would transmit an audible translation of what he wanted to say. It sufficed for most communications, but it did lack all nuance. He spoke the narrated native language, of course, because of Cassini, and he learned many of the other native Concord tongues in order to be better at his job. But this language didn't appear to have much in common phonetically or symbolically with any of those. So in a way, he was still starting from scratch. When the program finished, he tried it out. Let's see if it worked. That voice box sounds prissy. Can't you make it sound more like us? Maybe after I've heard you all speak a bit more. Aaron removed his hand from the goo, a little surprised to discover it left no residue behind, and returned to his position, a respectful meter behind Tulsey's cockpit chair. As they drew near, the true scale of Nither began to make itself known. Turns out it wasn't a dozen cities, but 100 or more. At its longest point, it must stretch for something like 1,000 kilometers. The only stellar body he'd ever seen that compared in size was Earth's still-in-progress artificial moon replacement, Luna, but that one was mostly empty space on the inside. He supposed the Orangeli stellar ring must have had more surface area, but the Rossi had destroyed it centuries ago. This structure, though, it looked to be jam-packed to bursting with purposeful activity and, one supposed, people. Excuse me. This wasn't what he had expected to find. These Hesgear were going to require a great deal of attention, and he might be staying for a while. He briefly considered sending a message to Nix, but decided it could wait until he had a better picture of what he discovered. That will come back to bite him. Just a little hint there. They approached a sea of docking ports stacked underneath the station. They lacked the dramatic elegance of Concord HQ's pinwheels, but they were definitely a more efficient use of space. Rows upon rows were sandwiched together and stacked 50 high, except for the bottom few rows, which were spread out more spaciously to allow for larger cargo ships to dock. Given the size of this station, this couldn't be the only docking location, but there must be room for 10,000 ships here. How many people lived here? His brain couldn't calculate out even a rough guess. Tulsa eased his ship into an empty dock 2/3 of the way up and near the edge. A faint thud signaled a docking lock, and Tulsa began what Aaron assumed were shutdown procedures. Are there many non-Hesgear on Nither? Almost none. Great. Will I be safe here? As safe as anyone is once I get you a marker. Stay at my side until then. Don't wander off after either. Tulsa made a sound that sounded like a gurgling sigh. Outsiders have to be sponsored. This is only the second time I've sponsored someone, and the first time, Tulsa blinked, eyelids hidden deep in the recesses of his eyes, thrusting out and down. If you commit a crime while you're here, I'm responsible. Since I have no idea if I can trust you, I'm going to keep a tight leash on you. Don't make me regret doing this. I won't. I will point out, however, that I have no idea what constitutes a crime in your culture. If I make the wrong hand gesture or touch the wrong spot on the wall. Tulsa strapped on his backpack and grabbed a second duffel. We are not an effete or even especially polite society. We also value our personal sanctity quite highly. Don't try to take what's ours, and you won't be harmed. Ironic, coming from a thief. Okay, there you go. Another sneak peek into The Thief, the next book. I hope you enjoyed that and everything today. Thank you for coming, and I will see you again next month. Bye.